First, I just want to say welcome to everybody. It's so good to see you guys here for another one of our Lunch and Learn presentations. My name is Robin Clem, and I'm the Outreach Archivist for the Georgia Archives. If we haven't met yet, I'm super excited to meet everyone. And I just started in July, so I'm getting to know everybody slowly but surely. Our Lunch and Learns are sponsored by FOGA, which is the Friends of Georgia Archives and History. So we always want to say, excuse me, a big thank you to FOGA as they sponsor our snacks and our drinks, which are on that table back there. There's also a donation box if you would like to donate, and there's a donation button on the Archives website as well. After this presentation, if you'd like to go down to our research or reference room to research and look around, and you haven't been to the archives before, feel free to absolutely do that, but you need to stop by the front desk to get registered and to sign up. It's free and it's good for 5 years, so please take advantage of that. If you do have a researcher's card, which means you know the rigmarole, make sure you just go to the front security desk to get signed in after our presentation. And as you guys know, we're very happy to have our speaker, Dr. Roger Byrd, here with us today. And before I get too far into it and introduce him, we'd like to do our door prize first. So I'm going to ask Dr. Byrd to come up and we'll go ahead and pick our door prize winner. Did everybody get a ticket before we pulled? Did you get one? You got one. You got one. Okay, perfect. Good. Perfect. Thank you. All right, the winning ticket. 861. Up here. There you go. You were already ready. So you'll get the copy of Vanishing Georgia. Oh, you have it. And we'll also give a copy of Vanishing Georgia to Dr. Byrd as a show of our appreciation for coming to speak today. All right, Dr. Roger Byrd is an associate professor of social sciences and behavioral sciences at Brewton Parker College in Mount Vernon, Georgia. Dr. Byrd is also BPC's Director of Prison Programs, overseeing the school's implementation of post-secondary educational opportunities and second chance Pell programming within prison facilities. Prior to his career in education, Dr. Byrd served as a Georgia State Representative for 22 years. During his tenure, he chaired 2 standing committees and was a member of 3 state boards with jurisdiction over a variety of issues ranging from transportation to services for people with disabilities. After retiring from the legislature, he returned to serve for 2 years as House Messenger and Chief of Staff for the Speaker of the House. Dr. Byrd is active on a number of boards focused on higher education, advocacy, and public charity. His book on higher education in prison, Sisyphus No More, published by Rowman and Littlefield Publishing, was nominated as Book of the Year by the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences. He has also written and illustrated 2 children's books and a devotional book for inmates. Roger Byrd is a native of Hazelhurst, Georgia, hailing from the rural Snipesville community. He holds degrees from Brewton Parker College, Valdosta State University, Armstrong Atlantic State University, and Georgia Southern University. So everyone, please help me in welcoming Dr. Roger Byrd to the Georgia Archives. Thank you so much.
Well, good afternoon. It's good to see you. Thank you very much for that, Robin. The Lunch and Learn series is a very vital and important part of what the Georgia Archives does. And this brings some topics of interest to interested people, both live and YouTube, through YouTube. It's a very valuable contribution because history, and I'm not telling you anything that you don't know, history is so vital to us, especially now, living in a time when it seems that we have lost our memory to some extent as to what our foundations are and where we're going. Where we come from actually directs very much where we will go in the future. I grew up in well, first of all, let me introduce my editor and my wife, April. She comes with me. Thank you. Yes. She actually was on this book journey with me. We have written several things together, but this one took a while. This book actually began 20 years ago at the Booth Western Art Museum in Cartersville. If you haven't been, I recommend it to you because they have really built something phenomenal there. The Booth and the Georgia Archives have similar missions, and that is to keep us grounded and so that we know where we're from and where we're going. But we began there. A friend of ours at the Booth, Jim Dunham, asked me to put a presentation together about Georgians that had had an impact on the West. And I said, well, that'll be a short book. And very quickly, I found 10 very vibrant stories that in this book, and we'll talk about them, that have fascinating ramifications. They ripple even today. Social issues like racial rights, women's rights, Native American rights, and on and on. Other things that the good and the bad and the ugly, we sent them all west. Everyone left Georgia and made an impact. Every one of these stories that left Georgia, of these people, they made a great impact on the West. I grew up in a small community, very rural. We were farmers. And I grew up in an era when there were 50 television shows every week about cowboys and Indians and the West. And my father was, I always said he was kind of a frustrated cowboy. We had horses, and I could live to some extent that fantasy of being a cowboy, but I always felt a little disconnected, that the West was some other place and that the West was really not something that I was a part of. And it wasn't until later that I came upon the notion that everything that happened in the West actually began in the East. The people that actually made a difference on the frontier were Easterners that went west for some reason. And when we sat down to write this book, I wrote this: those of us who live in or come from the great state of Georgia are no exception to having a connection to our ancestors, and that we're inheritors, if you will, the heirs of our cultural history. And oh boy, I wrote, what an abundance of historic riches we have. In fact, the Peach State has been home to some of the most outstanding, adventurous, and intriguing historical figures ever to grace the soil of this great nation. And I thought, just as you believe, that we should somehow begin to uncover some of these stories. Now, some of them you will know. Some of them I expect will be some have been are a bit obscure, but hopefully by the time you leave, you'll know more about them. All right. We began this book looking at the great state and where all of the people that in these 10 biographies or these 10 stories were from and what they did. And out of that came up what I thought was an interesting cover, but the story comes from, or the title comes from, There Is My Country, which if you know the story of Joanna Troutman from Knoxville, Georgia, she created, as a 17-year-old young girl, the battle flag that the Georgia Battalion carried to Texas. And it was a simple banner. Stories are that she created it from her petticoats, who knows, but it was a silk banner. On one side was a 5-pointed blue star on a white background. And on the other side was, in Latin, the words, "Where liberty dwells, there is my country." 17-year-old young ladies from Knoxville were not allowed to march with the Georgia Battalion to Texas, but she contributed the best she could. The rest of her story, as we'll talk about in a minute, is quite fascinating, but that's where the onus or the beginning of this story is. We believed in that the Western ideal, and that came to us from those 50 television shows we watched, everything from Bonanza to Lancer to Tales of Wells Fargo. We thought of the Western ideal, the guy who was the loner, who was self-sufficient. And actually, the Western ideal wasn't correct. The Western reality, the word Western comes to us from, I believe, Willa Cather, the great American writer, who said that Western is the notion, the inclination, actually the draw to go west to something new. And the Western ideal was not the same as the Western reality. People left Georgia for various reasons, some of them quite good and some of them quite bad. The people that we speak of came from all parts of the state, all the way from North Georgia, all the way down to Valdosta, Thomasville, over in Savannah. Very interesting stories, each of them. You know some of them. You know about Doc Holliday, who, by the way, tomorrow they're having a festival in his honor over in Griffin. He's still quite the character in Griffin. They're having the Doc Holliday Festival. So you can dress up in your Doc Holliday outfits and go and have a good time if you like. I'm sure they'll have the usual festival fare as well. But Doc Holliday was an interesting fellow up from the Griffin area, went all the way down and lived in Valdosta, and that's where he made his decision to go west. Lots of stories about that. But he was, at the end of the Civil War, his mother, who was a great influence on his life, told him, son, he was 14 years old, my brother, your uncle, has been released from a prison camp where he's been held, and he's on his way south. He's infirmed. I need you to go get him. Now imagine what she was asking a 14-year-old boy to do. To take their only horse, a revolver, go north. If you ever saw Gone with the Wind, you know what it was like with all the returning Southerners, and although that's fictional, the former soldiers coming south were in quite a desperate state. So take our horse and go north, find my brother, and bring him home. Was almost an impossible task. But shortly thereafter, John Henry, as she called him, came home with her brother and the horse. So he must have been quite an able young man. He got into trouble because Valdosta was garrisoned by Northern troops. In those days, they were African-American troops. and that created a great deal of controversy and tension within a deeply Southern community that had lost everything. So John Henry got into a scrape with some youngsters who were African American over a swimming hole incident. Shots were fired. Various stories are told, but apparently no one was hurt. But John Henry had to leave. So he went north. He became a dentist, actually. And it was through the practice. That was a good trade for a young man. And from a Southern family, it was honorable. But he also caught what his mother and his brother died from, and that is tuberculosis. So he went west and went to Texas, and as they say, the rest is history. I won't tell you all of that. But then there was John C. Fremont. John Fremont was from Savannah, or he was born there. Something of a questionable or maybe even an illicit circumstances of his birth, but he became an adventurer. He explored the West. He became a great soldier. He was known as the Pathfinder, married Senator Benton's daughter, and they had quite a life together. Feast and famine, up high, down low. But he left an indelible mark on the West. And he was actually the first Republican candidate for president, and he came from Savannah. And we've already spoken about Joanna Troutman. Well, Joanna, after the Georgia Battalion left, they were passing through Knoxville, and they left. They went and had terrible experiences in Texas. Many of the Georgia Battalion were massacred at Goliad. But as the Battle of San Jacinto took place, the battle cry was, "Remember the Alamo, remember Goliad." And out of that came a great legend. She later married a state senator named Vinson. She passed away and was buried in something of a neglected location. And the people of Texas said, "She's our hero. We want to remove her to Texas, to the state cemetery in Austin, and place a portrait in her honor in the state capitol, and place a bronze statue to her honor in the Texas cemetery." Joanna Troutman rests in the state cemetery of Texas today. An honored person. Actually, many people at the time that she went or became involved in the Georgia Battalion went west, there were a lot of people that would just hang a sign on their door and said, "Going to Texas." Lots of Georgians. The little place called Albany, Texas, there's a monument to the Georgia Battalion. The city of Albany, Texas was named for the city of Albany, Georgia. Many Georgians still reside, or people with Georgia roots reside there. They love to have Georgians come visit. James Walker Fannin was the commander of the ill-fated Georgia Battalion, and he died at Goliad with about 400 of his men massacred by the Mexican army. Oh, by the way, you might guess that Fannin County is named for him. And then there's Henry Ossian Flipper, a story of great strength of character, fortitude, and perseverance. Henry Flipper was born to a former slave who had purchased his freedom, his wife's freedom, and was quite a successful craftsman. He raised a number of children. They all were trained in various arts and were very successful. Flipper and they were actually from Thomasville. Flipper actually wanted to go to West Point. He wrote Congressman Freeman, and Freeman appointed him to West Point, which was the the custom of the day. But Flipper had all the credentials and all the abilities. As a matter of fact, when he got his commission to go to West Point, people of means offered him a lot of money for that commission to go in his place. He refused. Completed. He was not the first African American to go to West Point, but he was the first to graduate. He became a successful after graduation, enduring a lot of torment and a lot of abuse. He graduated and became a second lieutenant. Was posted in the West and made quite an impact. He designed a ditch for drainage on one of his posts that is today still working, and it's known as Flipper's Ditch. But he got into trouble. Those were bad times. He spent too much time with someone who was not of his color, a young woman, and he was drummed out of the service on charges of embezzling funds, which he didn't do. It was most people after the investigations have agreed it was all a setup. He was drummed out of the service, but he worked as an engineer for the rest of his life and did quite well. And it was not until Bill Clinton came along that he was pardoned and he was restored and given his rightful honor. And today at West Point, to show you how the world turns, they have a dinner for the cadet who has shown the most character, and they call it the Henry Flipper Dinner. It's a turning world. And then there's John Ross. Why did John Ross go west? Not that he wanted to. It's just that we being the state of Georgia and the federal government, actually removed he and the Cherokee tribe to Oklahoma because we had a desire for their land. And Ross was the principal chief of the Cherokee until he died. Was seen as a great leader of the Cherokee and a man of great perseverance. Lost his wife on the Trail of Tears, but continued to serve his people. Make a point in the book that heroes are not heroes because they win. Heroes are heroes because they do the right thing, even under difficult circumstances. And that's certainly the case for John Ross. John Bozeman, the Bozeman Trail. We know that story. He went west, went to, of course, they named Bozeman, Montana after him, but he was more of a businessman, a merchant, a trader. He was something of an adventurer and an Indian fighter, if you will. He was actually, the story of his death is that he was killed by Blackfoot Indians. There's some question about that because John had the habit of forming, shall we say, relationships with women who were already matrimonially obligated, and the belief is that he may have offended one of his companions on that trip, and they just blamed it on the Indians. No one knows exactly, but he was quite the man. He built great relationships. He built a city. He opened that part of the West, which Bozeman, Montana, even today is not. It's got some fairly rugged edges, if you will. This is the most tragic story in the book. It's the story of the family of John German. John German was a Civil War veteran from up in North Georgia. He had 7 children. He and his wife had some very difficult times. He was a prisoner of war, and it affected him physically. It was a very difficult time. After the war, they decided that because things were not good in Georgia anywhere, They wanted another chance. They wanted to start fresh. So they began a journey that actually took several years to go west. And then one day on the plains of Kansas, they encountered a very angry Cheyenne war party. Now the Cheyenne were upset from lots of reasons, but they had been fighting against the encroachment, and they saw a lone wagon, which was German and his wife and their 7 kids, and they attacked it. They killed John German, killed his wife, killed 3 of his daughters, 2 of his daughters and his only son. And the 4 girls that remained were taken captive, and they served as slaves and possessions, if you will, of the Cheyenne for a period of time until General Nelson Miles was able to negotiate their return. Very tragic story. The women lived into old age, all 4 of them. They all married. They had families, and I've searched really hard to find pictures of them. There are very few. There's not a picture of any of them smiling. I just think their life was terrible. They were abused, obviously, as you can imagine, while they were captives, and they just had difficult lives. They never really spoke much about that time, only to say it was a terrible time. Some of their family wrote about it later, but it's a terrible story. It's a tragic story. Last year, there was a movie released called The Contested Plains. It had the usual, some of the usual suspects in it. Buck Taylor from Gunsmoke, Darby Hinton from Daniel Boone, and several others. And it just really never got a lot of traction, but it's that story. And it's, to me, it's a very, very interesting, although tragic story. Now I'm going to tell you real briefly now the 2 last stories that I want to talk about. Now I teach at Brewton Parker College, and I teach primarily criminal justice. So I chose 2 people at opposite ends of the criminal justice spectrum to talk about next. And the first one is a fellow by the name of Henry Heck Thomas. He was from Oxford, Georgia. Y'all know where that is. That's not far away. He was born in 1850, which made him, 10, 11 years old when the war broke out. And his family was not rich, but they did okay. He became involved in law enforcement and made his way to the Indian Territories with Judge Isaac Parker, where he linked up with 2 other marshals, one of them named Chris Madsen, and the other one was Bill Tillman, the 3 guardsmen, they were called. And they were the best law enforcement. They were superlative peace officers, if you will. He became famous for being good at his job and being, not being able to be corrupted. He married the daughter of a Baptist preacher before he left Atlanta, and they went west. She didn't like his devotion to his job, his obsession, I suppose, and didn't like being in the West. So she came home. Later, he met another lady, the daughter of a Methodist minister, and they spent their lives together until he died from a heart condition in Oklahoma. Very interesting fellow, very remarkable. Probably we should give him more credit than we do. But this guy, I love his story from the standpoint of, I love to read about Al Capone and that kind of thing. But Jefferson Soapy Smith, Soapy because he had a particular con that he would run. He left Atlanta. He was born in 1860, and he left Atlanta. His family they had financial a disaster after the war, as you can imagine. So they went west to Texas, and he developed along the way. He was told, it was said of him that he had developed a very glib tongue before he left Georgia, because it was his job. His mother ran a hotel. It's his job to go get people from the station and talk them into staying at his mother's hotel. And he became quite the salesman, even as a young man. So he developed that into a skill that where he realized he could make some real money. So what he would do is he would get bars of soap and tell people, you can buy this bar of soap for $5. And they're saying, a bar of soap for $5? But he said, not only will this soap cleanse your body, it will help to relieve some of the problems, the anxieties, the things that are going on in the world. In other words, it's where one guy said, hey, I'll give it a try. Guy in the crowd, and he walks up and unwraps the paper off, and he said, there's a $50 bill in here. I got it. And so then people begin to say, $5, that's not that much that's a valuable bar of soap. And so they would come up and start buying soap. And of course, there was never another $50, but Soapy made some money. He went on to Denver, became quite the con man, but he moved from con man to corruption. So what he had his own little group of supporters that actually became a gang, and to keep them from being arrested or troubled, he began to pay off politicians and police and those that would accept money to just look the other way. No harm, just don't be there when this happens. And then that led him into conflict with an even more violent gang. He left Denver and went to Skagway, Alaska, to begin the same kind of, and they had all kinds of scams there. One of them was when people would get to Skagway, they'd say, okay, you're here new, let us, for $5, we'll give us a message, we'll wire your folks back home and let them know you got here okay and that everything's good. Oh, yeah, I'll do that. And they would sit there at the little telegraph and got it. And the problem was there was no telegraph in Skagway, and they were just tapping on a little device. He began to do the same things there, though. He got deeper into corruption, and that led to greater conflicts with other people and people he cheated. There's only so many people to cheat in Skagway in those days, and he had been the 4th of July parade. He was the grand marshal of Skagway. He sat on the same platform with the governor and the mayor. He was quite popular. On the 8th of July, however, he had a conflict with someone he had cheated. Gunfight erupted, and he was shot and killed, died immediately. The guy that shot him died a few days later. But the interesting thing was when they decided, okay, Soapy's gone, who's going to preach his funeral? They couldn't find a preacher that would do it. So the word is maybe they had to hire this guy. I don't know. And I've read the sermon before. As a matter of fact, Soapy has I believe a great grandson or maybe great grandson, also named Jefferson Smith, who perpetuates and continues to tell his story. He makes no excuses for Soapy. He just tells the story. And by the way, he has a book. My books are $20. His books are a lot more, but maybe more information. But he's a good guy. But at the same time, what we found is that you can make a lot of money. You can cheat people. You can do whatever you do, but sooner or later, the bill comes due, and people don't remember you afterward. Certainly not in a fond way. They did bury him though, and he is resting in some peace, I suppose. All right, we published this book. If you're interested, we published it, and it's on Amazon. It was a bestseller on Amazon. It's very interesting, great to read, an easy read if you're interested in it. Hunger and Hardship Creek Press is our publishing imprint. If you're interested, we'd love to talk to you. My editor is here to answer any questions that you may have or work with you on that. All right, it is, according to this, I've got like 15 minutes or so left. So if you have any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them for you at this time. Anybody? What about anybody have a just a quick review? Anybody have a favorite character they'd like to know more about? Mm-hmm.
Jackson, Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Jackson County.
Mm-hmm.
He actually Hall County. Later it became Banks County.
Right.
Quite a character.
Yeah.
Started in several churches in North Georgia, and had this association with North Georgia.
Lots of great stories. The problem, and the archives struggles against this every day. There's so much information, so much history to try and preserve so that it doesn't just get away from us. And we have to, the way we handle that, the best way is just to retell the stories or tell the stories for the first time. It's great. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Of John C. Fremont
Mm-hmm.
archives and information in California history.
Yes, as the Bible says, the prophet is without honor in his own country. We don't even know. Most of us don't even know that Fremont was from Georgia. Yeah, he was. I think he was governor there, territorial. He was territorial governor in maybe New Mexico, Arizona. But he. I mean, the things the man did, and New Mexico. Yeah. Yeah, he was quite and lived his life like you hope to live your life. I mean, all out there. I mean, and his wife was all in with him. She was his biggest promoter and did a lot of writing on his behalf. And his father-in-law, the Senator Benton, was a great advocate. He didn't win I wonder sometimes if he had won the election for president, maybe that might have changed the trajectory a lot. But he didn't win, but he did break ground for the anti-slavery movement. He was bitterly anti-slavery. So was his family, and I wonder sometimes what might have been. But yes, he's a lot better known in your neck of the woods than in ours. Yeah. 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 Yes, ma'am. I don't know. I know the Troutman Sanders, the law firm, and the influence there. I don't know, but that's a good question that I do intend to research. You're right. It's an old name. I don't know if you've ever been to Knoxville. There's an old courthouse there. It didn't exist at that time, but the old courthouse is there. Her family owned a tavern and an inn there. That's where the Georgia Battalion was, where they met up. But I think she was, I don't know of any direct connection at this point, but I will research that. Mhm. Yeah. 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 It, I, I, I can't tell you exactly. About half of those that I do mention it in the book because it was such a part of the John Ross story. But John Ross was mixed blood. He was I think his father may have been Scottish. His mother was Cherokee, but he was all in for the Cherokee people. He was a merchant and a trader with them, and very honest, very well respected. And once he was elected principal chief by the Cherokees, he remained as principal chief until he died. He could have easily negotiated his way out of that and stayed and probably kept all his property. By the way, his home is still up in Rossville. If you ever go up there, they have restored it. But he probably could have done, but he chose not to. He went to Oklahoma with his people. He's the only story that I tell of someone who went west involuntarily. He didn't see any adventure. He didn't see any fortune to be made. He wanted to be an Indian on his land. What happened was people wanted the land. The white encroachers, if you will. But it's a very complicated story. Go see Unto These Hills in North Carolina sometime. But they wanted the land, and it was just a steady progression of how do we get it. Ross, to his credit, had a very optimistic point of view. He said, we will assimilate, we will become educated, we will learn the white man's language and do all of those things. None of that mattered. That was not what they wanted. They wanted the land. And he believed right up until the last moment that we could negotiate this out. He found out that not only had the negotiations failed, but he had lost his home in a lottery, that someone else had taken it. And so he had no choice, I guess, at that point. He could have cut himself a deal, but he had chose to stay with the people. His wife died. Yes. Sure, please. Okay. There was his wife who had died on the way. Lots of people died. About half, was it? About a fourth of the people died on the way. And we don't tell that story because it's like the game you played in high school where the whole team sucked. You don't talk about that. Our team didn't do the right thing. We actually we don't like to talk, and we don't like to talk about the bad parts of history. And really and truly, that's the part we really need to know, because that's how you don't make those mistakes again.
Thousands of the Indians in Georgia were rounded up, and about a fourth of those died. The Trail of Tears was actually 3 different trails so that they could keep people moving. They moved in groups of approximately 1,000 each along 3 different routes. It wasn't just one route along there. The Cherokee had actually assimilated so well that some of them were actually slaveholders as well, and they took up slaves with them. So it wasn't just Indians that went. Their slaves were also on that Trail of Tears, dying along the way with the Native Americans. And it to show how everything's connected. News has come out more recently, about where is it, Oklahoma? In the Tulsa massacre in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
The reason there was such a large presence of African Americans in Oklahoma, of all places, to that amazing community that they had built up in Oklahoma was because those were the descendants in the 20s of the slaves that had gone west on the Trail of Tears. That's why there were Indians, and I mean, there were Native Americans on reservations. And then once, of course, they stayed on the reservations because they had treaties. But when the slaves were freed, those African Americans didn't really have a home to go to. And so they found, free land. There were the land lotteries and things like that. And they were able to claim land out there and build their own community. So, when you look at how everything's connected, the Trail of Tears led to, whole communities that we often don't even realize where they would have come from. But as far as along the way for the Trail of Tears, it wasn't uncommon for, because they were passing through crossing rivers, so they're passing through river towns and all these different little towns that they had to go through, that people would hear that the Native Americans were coming. And so they would come out and stand by the roadside, to jeer them. And in our pictures, if you will, think of the Jews being removed in World War II. We've seen the newsreels on that. And the Native Americans were treated all along that route the same way. We're removing vermin. And if you want to look at the real reason that they couldn't stay, even though they had assimilated, even though they learned the language, they dressed the way the white men did. We always think gold rush being California, except the first gold rushes started in Georgia and Carolina. This is where gold was found first, and that's why they needed to have the Native Americans gone, because and that's what really started the removal treaties. Was when gold was discovered there, you had people going on to the land that we had given the Cherokee that they were going to have forever. But people started showing up to get that gold, and of course the Cherokee defended their land. And they fought back, and so then they were hostiles. And so we've got to get them out of here because they're killing white people. And that's what actually led to it. It was gold.
Other questions? We're getting close. Let me close with this. In the dedication of the book, we wrote to the brave Georgians who ventured westward in pursuit of a better life, leaving their impressions on American history as indelible as wagon tracks on the Bozeman Trail. Be they heroes or villains, their fearless spirit of adventure and courage to westering live on in their names and in their legacies. May we all be so bold as those Georgians who followed the sun into the frontier. Thank you.
In their tin and metal collected that comes in, they have gold over here, gold. And he says no Georgia gold, and we were the gold rush. We were
No.
because it was just all confused and claimed that nothing thought to even include that in the historical record.
It's forgotten, written and soon forgotten. That happens.
So I just want to thank Dr. Byrd again for coming to our Lunch and Learn. It was a great presentation, and we thank you so much. I believe they brought books, so if you're interested in purchasing one, I know you can purchase one today or order one. So feel free to come up and talk to them about that. Before we leave, I'll tell you a little bit about what's coming up at the archives in October and going forward. Our next Lunch and Learn is on former state parks of Georgia by Andrew Bramlett, and that'll be on October 13th. And then We have our church records exhibit still going on until November 4th downstairs, so please stop by and check that out. And then for anyone interested in genealogy, we have our upcoming Archives and Genealogy Day event on October 7th. So there's programming and information for that on our website, which is georgiaarchives.org. And then we always ask you to explore our Facebook and our YouTube channel. We'll put up Dr. Byrd's presentation on our YouTube channel probably by Monday. So feel free to check that out. And you can also learn more about the archives there. And I just want to say thank you again for stopping by with us today. Please feel free to stay and chat and talk to other attendees. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.